Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to Vision Forward. This session tonight is called Political Persuasion for Polarized Times. My name is Chris Weldy, and I'm one of the leaders of this series. So want to welcome everybody. I see Jeannie, hi, and some new faces. Hi, Lillian. You'll appreciate this, I think. Hey, Bruce. Welcome, Ari. Gosh, okay. And I see Merritt disguised as somebody named Ruth Ann. So, but I'm on to you. I know who you are. Okay. So,
Okay.
welcome everybody. Uh, if you, I want to mention that we're live streaming this. So if you would prefer for your video not to be on, or if you don't want to be on camera on the live stream, this is your opportunity to turn your video cameras off, although we're happy to and like seeing your happy faces. Again, my name is Chris Weldy. I am the host for this series. We'll be joined by somebody coming from far, far away in New Zealand, Dr. Chris Hale. So for one moment in time, you're going to have two Dr. Chris's on the same call. So how's that? So we're just going to wait for folks to join us. We had a little over 100 sign up. I see there's about 83 that are on right now. So again, welcome everybody, and we will be getting started in a minute. As you're joining us, why don't you go ahead and drop your where you're coming in from in the chat. And if this is your first time joining a Vision Forward series, go ahead and mention that as well. So if you're with an Indivisible group or 5051, I know I send it out to a number of my different groups, just kind of indicate, what type of group you're joining from. And we're really happy to have you here tonight. All right, I see we're up to 93 and climbing, so we'll just give it a couple more minutes. And so the session tonight is called Political Persuasion for Polarized Times. We're going to start initially with everybody muted. I think you probably saw as you were joining, we're going to ask you if you have questions to put them in the chat, preceded by the word question. And the other thing we're going to ask is to do your best to keep the chat quiet, so not have a lot of side dialogue, so we can see all those questions in the chat. It makes it a little bit easier for the moderators. Okay, all right. All right, I think what I'm going to do right now is turn it over to Bill. And we'll go ahead and just give a short overview of the Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action Indivisible group. For those of you not familiar, they are based out of Chicago, while I am actually here in San Antonio, Texas. So we have a pretty diverse group, and for all intents and purposes, it's national with about 20,000 folks in the Chicago area, and then the other 20,000 all over the United States. And maybe even actually, I saw someone that's coming in from India, and then we have Chris from New Zealand. So I'll say globally. All right, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right. Can you see my screen?
I right now see the title slide.
That is what we're looking for.
Oh,
Okay,
okay.
folks, welcome to, as Dr. Chris said, Political Persuasion for Polarized Times. And these are the right times for sure, for sure. All right. So this is being brought to you by NWSOFA, which stands for Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action. We originally started about 13 years ago. 17 folks got together and we said we should do something. Barack Obama had just been elected the second time, and we started this progressive group. We had no idea the growth we would have. So today we are part of Indivisible, and Indivisible has 2,900 chapters nationwide. We believe that we are one of the larger chapters across the country, which is kind of cool to believe. So our goal by having these presentations, having these Zooms, is to organize and educate the people that are attending. We want you to understand the facts. We want you to be able to sharpen your arguments and communicate to your audience. And that audience could be a friend that you're having a cup of coffee with. It could be a dinner with your family. It could be leading a group. So we think if you have the facts, you can make much better decisions and can present and speak much clearer. NWSOFA is organized on the twin snowflake principle. On the left side, you see our communications team. There are 22 different ways that we reach out to you. And we do it on a variety of ways. And we have many people who say, "Oh, you over communicate." Well, we do that because, as Dr. Chris said, we have over 40,000 members, and not everybody has our Facebook. Not everybody is on our Substack. Not everybody's on our Discord. Not everybody gets our sends that we send out or our mobilize. So by using all these, we get to everyone. We have 22 issue teams. You'll see 20 of them represented here. We haven't updated the last two, but at the very top, we started with gun violence prevention right after Sandy Hook. That was the first issue team that the 17 folks that had done the organization started. And you can just see around the area that we added every few months and every few years, other groups. All of those 10 on the inside have been added since Trump started his second administration. So over the year, last year, we did over 600 Zoom and in-person events. This year, we're projected to be on a rate of 700 Zoom and in-person. We have 17,000 members in the Northwest suburbs and 27,000 members across the U.S. That totals to about 45,000, but we have duplicates in there, so we roughly say about 40,000 members. Our leadership team have 30 all volunteer leaders that work very hard every month to bring issue teams, presentations, and to help out with the communications. It is an all hands on deck. We call this our secret sauce right here. Just to give you a little impact of what we did in July, we had 67 events. We created 24 new videos. We had 29 Substack articles. Newsletters, we sent out 31. And then we had the special invites that followed those up. And we have over 6,000 folks on Blue Sky. So just a little of what we're doing and what happens every day. Here are some of the typical daily Zooms that we have. Every morning we start out with coffee and conversation, Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. Central Time. And then every Friday we cap that off with a 5 o'clock happy or unhappy hour, depending on the week, at Central Time also. And in between all that, we have presentations constantly that are brought up by our various issue teams. We also have in-person events at fairs, etc. On the top right, you can see our 34-foot tall chicken as we had our No Kings rally here in Arlington Heights. We have pizza night at lower right, and we have our 13th annual picnic coming up Saturday, August 22nd, noon till 8, and that's in Arlington Heights. So if you're in the area, stop by anytime between noon and about 8 o'clock. Actually, last year, I think we ended up at about midnight. So just a lot of different things that we do. If you go up to the Mobilize or you go up to our thing, there's a little spreadsheet there where you can find out what to bring. So tonight, we've got the NWSOFA Vision Forward series on political persuasion. And I'm going to let Dr. Chris take it over. Just remember that we're asking you to put your questions in chat. And when you start out that question, do it with all caps. And at the end of the presentation, one of the co-hosts will consolidate and ask those questions of the speaker. There also is Dr. Chris has an associate that will be answering some of those questions that he sees in chat. So let's move forward. Dr. Chris?
Okay, if you can just move on to that next slide, the Vision Forward slide. I'll start with that.
It's up.
Oh, okay. I don't see it on my end. Let me see if I can.
Oh,
In the process, I think.
Oh, okay, it's still coming. All right. No worries.
well,
Maybe.
but I'm going to have to bring it back up again. Excuse me.
Yes.
I had to stop the share and then start the share again. So sorry, folks. Give me just a few more seconds. There we go.
Okay, and then just the very next slide, the vision forward one. Yeah, so while Bill's getting that pulling that up, the second slide, just to give you a little background. So we had a program more than a year ago that we called Vision Forward, and it was really focusing on just what we could do to better message our pro-democracy vision. And so we, through the year, had a number of different sessions. We came up with a messaging guide, and hold on just one second. I'm actually in our headquarters office here, and there's another meeting going on and I can hear them. So,
Dr. Chris, I do not have the vision forward slide.
oh, you don't? Okay, well, that's okay. I'll just kind of talk it. Um,
Okay.
yeah, so basically out of that session, when it ended, we actually had four different kind of breakout I used to say Vision Forward had babies. So one of them was a learning lab series. And so you may remember some of the sessions that Kara did, what I wish I would have said. So, and right now those sessions are on pause just because we're focusing on the election. And then we had another series called Truth Sandwich, and that's the one where we were basically modeling after the Indivisible Truth Sandwich, model on how to fight misinformation and disinformation. And we recently just had a session from Adrienne Gillespie, who used to work for Indivisible National on disinformation. And then the third line of effort was just the in general messaging one. But the one we're connecting with today is our bridging series. And that was, you may remember, it's when we partnered with Braver Angels and they did a number of different sessions. So today we're partnering with Smart Politics. And so the session itself is called Political Persuasion for Polarized Times. And I mean, certainly we are at a time of very deep political polarization where many of us are likely asking, how do we reach people who see the world very, very differently than from us? So tonight, I would say it's not about winning arguments. It's about learning how to lower defensiveness, build connection, and create conversations where people are willing to listen and consider another point of view. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Chris Hale as our instructor tonight. He's a practicing ER physician. He's based out of New Zealand, which I thought was cool. He's a political organizer who's worked with Smart Politics, the Deep Canvassing Institute, and Sister District, and now States to Win. He brings both organizing experience and his ability as a physician to quickly establish trust and rapport on his work with political persuasion. But joining him is Locke Peterson, who's the Smart Politics content manager. And Locke has worked with Smart Politics founder Dr. Karen, I hope I say her name right, Tamirius, for the past 6 years and will be available after the presentation to answer your questions about Smart Politics, its programs, and how you can stay connected and involved. I actually learned of Smart Politics through somebody in this group. And they also have something similar to our learning lab sessions where they can kind of practice some of the techniques and just ways to have these interactions and dialogue. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to, I see you've named yourself Dr. Chris too. So Chris Hale, and he's going to lead us through the session tonight. Thanks, Chris, for being here.
Yeah, I was instinctively reflecting like whenever somebody said Dr. Chris, I was like me, and I was like, so well, everybody can call me Dr. Chris too. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. So just to give you a very quick introduction for like who the hell is this guy? Why should I listen to him? So I am a practicing ER doctor. The States are my home. We've only been in New Zealand a short period of time. I've, been on in the No Kings rallies. We've gone to ICE detention centers. This is this, but the states are our home. What happens in the U.S. affects the rest of the world. And so my real brief journey is through up until 2016, I felt I was being a good citizen. I always voted, and I felt that that was enough. And then while in between saying patience in on election night on 2016, I saw the returns come in and suddenly realized, well, I thought there were enough adults in the room to prevent this kind of thing from happening. I guess I have to do more. So like a lot of you probably happened with you guys, you felt okay, I have to look for something else to do. This is brand new. I'm beginning my journey. So I started looking for organizations to help with. Volunteer with our local Indivisible group. I really got involved in Sister District, which just recently changed its name to Stateswin. Did a lot of fundraising, did phone banking, knocked on doors locally, and got more and more involved. And at the same time, spent a lot of time trying to convince people on social media about how to correct their thinking about things. I have a very scientific mindset. I was raised, in medicine, and so it feels like facts should be enough. And spend a lot of time. Somebody would post something, I'd spend a lot of time researching data and finding good sources, and I put all this information on, in a response, and I'd get crickets or I'd get like complete dismissal. And it was so frustrating. And then going through, the pandemic, being on the front lines in the ER in the States, all the things that you think are memes about people wanting ivermectin and believing it's a hoax or believing George Soros is doing something in the vaccines was all real. That's not just like hyperbole and memes. People would say those things to me, and I did not understand why are facts not working. I want to give you a graph and a bar chart and shake your shoulders and say, look, it's data, but it doesn't work. So I began doing more and more research to say, why doesn't this work? Why are we so ineffective in changing people's minds? What's a better way to do things? So began getting into things like deep canvassing and learning those techniques as well, and eventually found Smart Politics, which is founded by Karen Timarius. She is a psychiatrist, but also deeply researched things that change people's minds effectively. And so this is kind of the what you're going to see tonight is kind of a culmination of all the things I have learned over the course of time. So you guys can all learn from my mistakes and learn how to be more effective in changing people's minds and pulling people back from the brink of our very polarized times. So we'll get started. All right. Can you give a thumbs up if you can see the presentation? Okay. So as we go along, there'll be times where we'll ask some questions. Some of those are going to be asking about your experiences. My colleague Locke here will be reading the chat. He'll call out some of those, and some of the we'll try to save time at the end for kind of broader questions as well. Okay. So again, this is Karen Tamarius. She's not able to join us today, but she has regular podcasts on Substack, and Locke can tell you more about this. And this is Locke Peterzyme. He's with us here today. He's the content manager. Really, none of this would be happening without him. Okay, with teaching, I have been told the best way to go about this is tell people what you're going to teach them, then teach them, then remind them what you taught them. So this is going to be a lot of information. And so don't expect to get everything. This is something that is kind of, like I said, a culmination of tons of information. So if you take away nothing else from today, these will be the takeaways, and we'll come back to this. So facts and reason don't work. I'll repeat that. Facts and reason don't work. They actually make people less likely to change. Fortunately, relationships do work where facts don't. Critically, you can't make somebody change their mind, but you can lead them to a point where they change their own minds. And when they change their own minds, it's much more likely that that will be a long-term change. If you're ever in doubt during these conversations, ask another question. You can never go wrong with that, or just reflect back your understanding of what they've been telling you. And finally, the goal in a conversation isn't to change somebody's political thoughts 180 degrees, it's just to plant a seed of an idea that could potentially grow over time. Okay, we'll revisit all of this. So as we go along, this seems overwhelming these days. How we are so polarized. How can we possibly change people's minds on these things that people are very passionate about? So I'm going to intersperse all the meat and potatoes with a little bit of like inspirational interlude to show these are things that can change and be effective. We can change people's minds. So I'm going to switch for a moment. And we're going to watch a brief video. So this comes out of deep canvassing work. So deep canvassing came out of the fight for marriage equality. And in California, advocates were repeatedly trying to get these ballot measures passed to make same-sex marriage legal. And the polling always seemed to be positive. It looked hopeful. Like more people said that they were for it. But then the election would come around and would be defeated. And ultimately, the advocates said, "What is going on? Why don't we just go and talk to people? Talk to people and see how they're really feeling, why they voted the way they did." And so out of this came the techniques of deep canvassing, which is really, when you think about normal canvassing that I'm sure a lot of you done, you have a list of addresses, you go there, say, "Can so-and-so count on your vote?" "No." "Okay, have a good day." Or "Yes, here's the polling place." Or maybe you give them a slip of paper and you take off. But deep canvassing develop techniques of having open, honest, curious conversations, and then out of that, really techniques to change people's minds. So this is going to be a video that was taken. This is a shortened version of a longer conversation during those original canvassing about same-sex marriage.
We're talking to folks about marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Do you remember that being on the ballot in 2000? Okay. Probably. Yeah. And do you remember how you voted on it?
We didn't vote.
You didn't vote. Okay. What would you say is on the side for you that's holding you back from supporting it? I'm just trying to understand better.
Basically, I kind of didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to make the wrong choice.
Yeah, sure. You want to do the right thing.
Now you're making me think about this. I happen to have a cousin. He's lesbian, that I love very much.
Mm-hmm.
And she's been with another woman for like about 20 years.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
So I don't have any prejudice.
What's your cousin's name?
Her name is Jill.
Jill. Okay. And so it seems like Jill would be real happy, right? If she could get married.
They'd like to, especially they're going through financial troubles.
Yeah, there's
and I believe this stuff, see, I get emotional.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, seems like it's really hard decision.
Well, income for health issues.
What? Just curious. Why does it, make you feel so emotional?
Because right now you can't.
Yeah. That's probably really hard. I saw you how much you love and care for them, and for a lot of folks, it's about protecting this sort of idea of man, woman, and things like that. But for us, it's about protecting each other.
Yeah, but you told me, and I was bringing that stuff up, and I realized that about my cousins, as much as I love them and stuff. I don't know that I take it in internally this much.
Yeah.
That's like you're saying about voting. Why didn't I? And now, because it wasn't something that was really super personal to me. So
we're going to be voting on this again in the future. I mean, what do you think would be the right thing to
I would vote for gays to be able to legally get married.
And why? I mean, why does that feel right to you?
Because I think if two people love each other, they love each other, it's a couple. And I expect that.
Okay. I've done this presentation a lot of times. I've seen that video countless times, and I think it always makes my eyes a little watery. So we are going to talk later as we go along about what was going on there, why that conversation was effective, and how we can have similar conversations. Okay, so this is, the presumption here is that most of you are on the liberal side. We're trying to convince people on the conservative side. Why is it so hard to convince conservatives? Well, the real question isn't why is it hard to convince conservatives? The real question is why is it so hard to convince humans? So, first we need to know before we learn what works, we need to know what doesn't work so we can stop doing the things that don't work. So, arguing with facts, we'll talk about it. It just doesn't work. I wish it did, but it just doesn't. Telling people what to do doesn't work, or attacking their worldview. They will become resistant. They are not going to be open to change. Anytime we're making people feel bad about themselves, they're not going to change. There was a time when I felt if we just, shamed people, if people understood that what they were doing was bigoted or racist, maybe they would change, but they don't. People don't like feeling bad about themselves. They don't want to accept that. And then shunning and cutting off relationships. I think we have done a lot of that. We have said, your support for certain individuals, your support for certain policies is a red line for me. I just can't deal with you. Maybe when you change your mind, I'll be open to coming back. And people have not come back to us, so that just doesn't work. We need something else. Does any, if this is a point where in the chat, if you want, does anybody have a story about, trying to convince somebody with facts that didn't work? Or is there anybody who you have cut off a relationship with, or just let that relationship kind of slide? And has that come back to you? Have they come back to you, changed their mind, or has that just kept their distance? So we'll move on, and then Locke, you can call out any answers as you see them. But why don't facts work? They don't work because our brain has something called reactance. It is a psychological aversion to being controlled by anyone. There's been a lot of recent studies of this. This is also known as the backfire effect. People don't like to feel like someone's lecturing them or telling them what to do. People will do the opposite in order to assert their autonomy. This is why 2-year-olds say no when you ask them to do anything. And this is not to say that conservatives are 2-year-olds. This happens for all of us. We don't want somebody to tell us what to do. Studies have actually shown that this actually, if you tell people what to do, it backfires. Arguing with facts has been shown to entrench people's opinions. They have done studies. There's a well-known study where it was done at Stanford. People were asked about their opinion on capital punishment, pro or against. Then they were given papers that gave the opposite argument, and they gave statistics to back those up. Now, this was a sociological experiment, so the statistics were made up, but they were the same statistics about whether it worked or not. And then they asked them, did this change your mind? And if you were pro capital punishment, the arguments made you more pro capital punishment. If you were anti capital punishment, the opposite argument made you entrench your opinion. So even when it was the same statistics, getting a contrary opinion made you dig in your heels. Now, why does this happen? Our tribal past explains our tribal present. So if you think about our brains, as sophisticated as they are in the modern world, are the same brains that they have been for tens of thousands of years. So when we were first evolving, we lived in small tribes of a few dozen people. And in the distant past, being shunned from the group would work to keep people in line because being shunned from the group meant death. You would not be, you would have trouble finding shelter. You'd have trouble finding food. You'd be susceptible to being picked off by a lion or a rival tribe. So we are hardwired in our brains to keep demonstrating visible signs that we belong to our tribe. And so that can be common customs. It can be certain phrases that we all use in common. It can be traditional clothing, think red hats, to identify other people of our tribe. But it also means avoiding questioning our side's opinions. Even if there might be a little bit of a doubt, we don't want to question it because we could get kicked out of our tribe. And they've done studies, actually MRI studies that show parts of the brain, and they've done physiological studies that show when somebody, your worldview is attacked, it triggers similar parts of the brains as physical threats. It triggers fear centers in our brain, it raises our heart rate, and these are leftover from our evolution. At the same time, as we were evolving and lived in small tribes, some of our biggest threats were from outsiders, from other tribes. So we are hardwired to be suspicious of people we see as outside of our tribe. If you were out on your own in a small tribe and you saw somebody coming over the hills, you would probably not think, hey, that person's probably a friend. The first instinct is, I don't know that person. They might mean me harm. So we default to trusting the people we see as being inside our tribe, and we're hardwired to be suspicious of people being outside our tribe. So our brain prefers to maintain the status quo rather than risk something new. So that's just a hurdle that we'll have to get past, and we'll talk about how. Now, our biggest evolutionary advantage as humans is our ability to get along with and cooperate with other humans. But if you've worked anywhere, or you have a neighbor, or you have family, you know that cooperating with other humans is difficult. And our brains evolved mechanisms to deal with the complexities of living in groups, and that's one of those is reasoning. Now, when we think colloquially of reasoning, we kind of think of like the age of enlightenment, the age of reason. We think about, oh, we are analyzing things impartially. But the way the brain actually reasons is not impartial deduction. A better way to think about it is reasoning is motivated arguing. So our brains will typically have a preconceived position, and then we'll use the reasoning to justify that position so we can win the argument. So we're not taking in data impartially. Reason didn't evolve to find the impartial truth, but it's to win arguments. Those motivated arguments helped us maintain our membership in the tribe, but it also might help us win self-motivated arguments within the tribe. Maybe we get higher status because we are winning the arguments. So we have a position we want, and our brain works to justify it. So that's kind of a complex idea. An easier way to think about that is that our brain makes decisions like a lawyer, not like a doctor. Now, maybe, admittedly, this speaks to me because I'm a doctor and I like the idea that doctors are impartial, but typically you think of a doctor as listening to the symptoms and doing some tests and data and gathering labs and then using those impartially to come to a conclusion about a diagnosis. However, a lawyer works the other way around. A lawyer is either the defense or the prosecution. They're not looking at the data to decide, do I want to be defense or do I want to be prosecution? They start as defense or prosecution, then they look for the facts, quote unquote, to support their arguments. So this is the way the brain actually works. Now, one of the main tools for this motivated arguing is confirmation bias. So our brain seeks information that supports our views and discounts evidence that challenges it. Now, critically, if you're a pundit on Fox News, we suspect that they are deliberately saying, what should I say to support my argument? But that is a very conscious decision. But in truth, our brain does this unconsciously. We tend to scrutinize other people's reasoning more rigorously than our own. And humans are very, very good at finding the weaknesses in other people's arguments, and we can actually be surprisingly blind to the weaknesses in our own arguments. And again, this has also been studied and verified. There was a study where people were given a series of simple reasoning problems, and they were asked to write down their explanations for how they got their answers. Then later on, they were given the answer. They were given two sets of answers, and they were told that one answer was theirs and one answer was from somebody else who disagreed with them. But because this was a sociologic experiment, for some people, they switched the answers. So you might get your own response back to you, but is labeled as somebody else's. And for the people who didn't realize the trick, 60% of people rejected their own answer that they had given because they believed it had come from somebody else. So the conclusion is that people default to defending their own prior conclusions and rejecting the conclusions of other people's. And so this is one of the reasons that facts don't work, because people will always be able to find their own facts to support their arguments. And they'll believe them because of confirmation bias. So this is why when I was spending all kinds of time online trying to give impartial data and good resources, it didn't work because they could find, one fact, one statistic from who knows what kind of unreliable source, and they believe that over everything else I could give them. So that's one of the reasons why we spin our wheels by trying to convince people with facts. Also, people have ego defenses. This is so shunning people doesn't work in the age of the internet. In the tribal days, if somebody was kicked out, it would be they'd be in the wilderness, they would die. But it doesn't work today, because if we shun people and cut off relationships, now people can find their own tribe online. And no matter how small that number of people is, if you spend all day on one small subreddit of people who believe what you believe, because that's the only people you're surrounding yourself with, it feels like your tribe is a lot larger than it really is. So cutting people off doesn't work. They will find somebody else to help support them and make them feel included. So, has anybody else here put in your chat, if you want to share, have you had a friend or family member that you cut off contact with, or they cut off contact with you because of politics, and what happened? Did those people come back to you later on, or did they stay cut off? I suspect my experience is most people, those relationships have become more distant, if anything else.
Yeah, I've got a few here, quick ones I can share, and if you want to follow up, we can. Beth says, I did cut off a close 60-year relationship when my very conservative friend let me know multiple times that she didn't trust me. Excuse me, sorry, Beth. Trisha said, unfortunately, both. I found myself distancing myself with the exception of family and close friends. It's a brick wall, so we agreed to hold different political views and world viewpoints. And then D said, coworkers would go out to dinner that are MAGA, and I like them at work, but cannot bear hanging out with them outside of work. So there's just some of the stuff that you guys have shared. I apologize for not catching them all.
No, that's it. I'm sure there's just so many to get through. This is so common these days.
Mm-hmm.
So another thing, when things that don't work, is if your conversations make people feel bad about themselves. The truth is, everybody is the hero in their own story. Have you ever heard of anybody who thinks of themselves as the bad guy? Nobody wants to believe that they're a bad guy, and we'll never convince somebody that they're a bad person so that they should change. So, as we talked about, conversations by default are less about learning new information and they're more about defending oneself. And so this can be frustrating because it feels like every conversation about these important issues is adversarial. So how do we actually persuade people in these circumstances? Well, conversations are by default, the way we normally hold them, are more about defense, but that's by default. So there are ways that we can engage a conversation with other people that will be less defensive and may help open up people's minds to being to changing. So another quick inspirational interlude while we take a breath. Some of you may or may not know this gentleman. He is one of my personal heroes. This is Daryl Davis. He is an amazing rock and blues musician, and he tours and he's still playing. But he is also well known for having personal friendships with people from the KKK, such that that many people have left the KKK because of that friendship. So he has had like 20 or more people who have left the KKK after befriending him and have given Daryl their old KKK outfits and hoods, and he's credited with probably having hundreds of people leave the KKK. So when he was growing up, he just never understood why people could hate him without actually knowing him. And so he often tells a story that he played a gig and he had somebody come up with him and he said, that person said, "Well, I've never heard a black man play so well." And then he, instead of cutting this relationship, or like, just cutting off right there, he continued this conversation. And this gentleman actually pulled out a card and showed that he was a member of the KKK. But Daryl Davis, extraordinarily brave, just continued that conversation. And then he continued the conversation over multiple interactions with this person. And then through these similar building relationships, people who, what, it's hard to think of somebody who you would figure would be less likely to change their mind than somebody who is an avowed KKK member. But he was able to use these same kind of techniques, not specifically, he didn't train with us, but these as open, honest conversations, asking questions and befriending people. And eventually this, had radical change in these people's worldview. Now, again, this is all little caveat here. If you're a black person, we're not advocating that you go talk to somebody from the KKK if you don't feel comfortable. If you're gay or trans, if you're female, there are situations where you have to take your safety front and foremost. So for those of us who are, in positions of more privilege and we can feel more safe in having these conversations, I think it's that we have more responsibility to do so. But for some people, if you feel the situation is right or the relationship already lends you to it, then these can still be effective. Okay. Now getting into more of the, what actually works. So the way we need to think about this is that the brain actually has two ways that it processes potentially persuasive information. There is a fast, intuitive gut level assessment, kind of like, what does your gut make you feel? How do you feel immediately? And then there's the slow, reasoned, effortful analysis, trying to remain impartial, looking at the data. So, unfortunately, intuition, that gut level assessment, is more important than reason. Now, evolutionarily, having a stable idea of how the world worked and acting in accordance with that saved energy and allowed us to act quickly. If we were in the bush and we saw something, some grass rustling, we wouldn't say, I should analyze what that is. We would get scared and we'd run away because it could be a lion. Or somebody is coming over the hillside. I don't know that person. Should I wait to see if they befriend me or come at me with a weapon? No, we're going to run away. So in those circumstances, evolutionarily, changing our underlying views about the world was risky because our current worldview kept us alive up until now, and new ideas might be dangerous. So another way to think about this was put forward by Jonathan Haidt, who's a sociologist. Think about the brain and how it processes information as being like an elephant and somebody riding on the elephant. The rider in this situation is the part of the brain that is analytical and persuaded by facts and analysis. And the elephant is part of the brain that reasons and makes assessments by gut feelings and emotions. So when we're going about our day-to-day lives, the part of our brain, the reasoning rider, likes to believe that they're in charge. But the truth is, it's the emotional elephant that has all the power. So that means if the elephant doesn't want to go somewhere, the rider can't force it. If the emotional part, the reactive part of the brain says, I'm uncomfortable with that, the reasoning part of the brain can't force it to go. But what happens is that the emotional elephant goes where it wants, and the rider unconsciously rationalizes that I always wanted to go that way. I'm not being emotional. My breathing part of the brain wants it to go that way. So this is where confirmation bias kicks in. We'll look for rationalization. We'll look for the information that supports what we feel. So we waste our time and all our energy, and we get frustrated trying to persuade the rational part with facts and data. But the rational part of the brain is not what's actually making decisions. It's the emotional part of the brain. So we need to stop arguing with the rational rider part of the brain and start communicating with the emotional elephant. We need to connect on um, uh, an emotional way with the people we're trying to persuade. Okay, so the key characteristics about the emotional elephant in this metaphor, the emotional part of the brain, is it's social. It's concerned about tribes and its place within the tribes. It's not interested in facts. It responds more to behavior and tone than words. So we can say all the right words, but if we say them in an accusatory fashion, we're folding our arms, we're scowling, we're giving all the body language that we're confrontational, the words don't matter. It's suspicious. It's set in its ways. It's wary of novelty. It doesn't like new things. So, what's the secret to persuading that emotional elephant part of the brain? How do we persuade people from a fundamental emotional values-based standpoint? We need to earn their trust. So this is what's called the trust pyramid. This is kind of, if you think about it as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is a similar idea. It starts from the bottom up. You can't get to the top without building the layers below it. So in in order for us to gain people's trust, we need to do multiple things. We can't just give facts and say, trust me. We need to show that we're worthy of their trust. So the bottom layer, comfort. We need to make them feel that we're safe to talk to. Now, this might be physically safe, but a lot of this is emotionally safe. They need to feel that we aren't going to, go online and call them racist or bigoted. We're not going to cancel them. But also, even just they need to feel safe that we're not going to make them feel bad about themselves. The next part is connection. We need to find ways that we are alike and come together. That might be things we have in common, like, hey, I like the same sports, or I like the same sports teams. Or it might just be ways we're alike as in common values. Like I have children. I care about my children like you care about them. I care about the country. And then comprehension is the next step up. We need to learn their point of view, and they need to understand that we see their point of view and how they see the world from their perspective. It's not enough just to listen to them. We need to actually demonstrate that we understand, and we'll talk about how to do that. And then higher up is compassion. We need to show them that we actually care about them and we don't want them to suffer. So this is where, you see YouTube videos that have titles of F around and find out, and it's MAGA people who are suddenly realizing I've lost my Medicare coverage and I'm having trouble making ends meet. We might feel some Schadenfreude there, but if we are demonstrating that we're happy about other people suffering, we're not going to be able to change their minds. And then finally, credibility, showing that we're doing our best to be rational, unbiased, open-minded when we're considering facts. So this is kind of the top part where we can potentially start talking about more information, but we'll talk more about that. So you'll notice that the majority of this, once again, as we're talking about the emotional versus analytical side of the brain, 4/5 of this is all just emotions and feeling, comfort, connection, comprehension, compassion. It's only that very top tiny part of the pyramid where we're talking about facts or figures or trying to convince somebody from a more rational point of view. So again, we need to focus on the emotional part. So remember, convince the emotional elephant part of the brain first, then you can potentially talk to the rational rider. Okay, another quick little inspirational interlude. They're not in the news as much anymore, but some of you may remember the Westboro Baptist Church. It was, essentially a cult of personality. It was a church, but it was essentially run by one patriarchal leader, and they did a lot of very vile anti-inflammatory things. They would go and they would protest at the funerals of gay people who had died and cheer that they had died. They would go to, as you can see here in the pictures here, they would go to the funerals of soldiers who died in Iraq and Afghanistan and say that, it was good that they died and this was God's punishment for, the heathenism and intolerance of the United States. So they did a lot of very inflammatory things. And this was one of the people from that family, Megan Phelps Roper, and she would do her she would do her duty for the church. She would go out there and have these, she was taught how to argue with people, and she'd say these inflammatory things. But there were some people that she would see who were counter protesters who didn't scream at her, but they would go up and talk to her and say, "Why do you feel that way?" And she would have conversations with them. And sometimes, same thing online, people would say vile things to her. And we understand the emotions involved in that, but there were some people who would actually ask questions and try to engage in conversations. And then she ended up meeting some of those people in real life. And for the people that she felt comfortable having this conversation with, she started to discover other people's point of view. She, through this way, started speaking to people who were gay and lesbian. And she started to realize, hey, I've been taught all my life that these are the worst, most vile people in the world, but they're treating me well. They seem like really nice people. And then that began to open her eyes to the possibility of questioning the other things she had been taught. More importantly, it also meant that she had essentially developing a tribe outside of her normal tribe that she could potentially go to. When you think about the tribal aspect of our brains, people won't leave their current tribe if they don't feel like they have somewhere else to go. So, people who live in cults, or, they live in a small town and they feel like, everybody else, if they try to, question what their tribe believed, they would be shunned. But because Megan Phelps Roper had other people that she began friendships with that were outside the Westboro Baptist Church, when she started questioning her prior beliefs, she actually had somebody that people that she could actually go to and have a community outside of where she had grown up. And so by developing relationships with people on the opposite end of the political spectrum, we can give people an off-ramp from where what they currently believe, if they believe that we are a safe haven for them. Okay. Quick check-in, Locke. Any other questions before we get kind of in the meat and potatoes of how we do this?
We have a ton of questions, but I think they're great for afterwards. I don't think
Okay.
But yeah, thank you, folks. I'm trying to keep up, but you're asking some great stuff.
Okay, and hopefully some of those questions will be answered as we go along, but other ones we'll get in as many as we can at the end. Okay, so how do we actually do this? So this is a persuasion conversation cycle. This is kind of the meat and potatoes of what smart politics teaches. And again, all these techniques have been, this is kind of best practices from all we know from sociological and neurologic studies about what actually works to change people's minds. So whenever we're having a conversation, again, we're considering that we're having a conversation, we're on the liberal side with somebody on the conservative side, and we want to try to persuade people or have a productive conversation. So the first part is asking questions. These need to be open-ended questions. They can't have yes or no answers. We need to get them talking. We want to ask people's opinions. Now, this seems like it should be difficult at first blush. When I started doing deep canvassing and we would call strangers on the phone and ask them their opinions, I thought there's no way in hell that somebody is just going to tell me, you talk to a stranger and have a conversation. But you would be surprised by how often people would just open up and give their opinions, because fundamentally people like to talk about themselves and they love to give their own opinion. A really good story or example of this is actually comes from a while ago. There's a really good anecdote around in the late 1800s. There was a couple of British prime ministers, Benjamin Disraeli and William Gladstone, and they both served as England's prime ministers, and they were both fierce political rivals. And there was a point when they were actually both single, and they happened to go on dates with the same young socialite on back-to-back evenings. And so a reporter caught wind of this, and he asked the woman her impressions about them. And she said, quote, "During our time together, Gladstone convinced me that he was the cleverest person in England, but Disraeli made me feel like I was the cleverest woman in England." So the idea there is that people will feel happier and they will have a better time in the conversation if you spend more time asking them about their opinions, asking them questions than just talking about yourselves. They will come away with a better view of you, even if they ultimately learn less about you than you've learned about them. Now, these questions, open-ended questions, have to be non-judgmental. If we lead with judgment, people immediately move into a defensive position. Okay, people are very perceptive when it comes to being judged. So again, a lot of it is your tone of voice and your body language. We need to show genuine curiosity. Okay, so in the chat, you can put in there, can you think of a time that you were having a conversation with somebody and you felt that person was judging you while they were talking to you? Or alternatively, was there a time that you had a conversation where you felt that someone was genuinely listening to you and really listening to you? And how did you feel at both those times? Yeah, okay, and while you type that, for those of you who want, so more about the questions. That seems like really broad. How do I know what to ask? Okay. This is what's called the code of curiosity. This comes from deep canvassing. So when you're having a conversation, you're not going to be trying to ask, about their rational justification for something. We're going to try to pull out stories, personal stories. So sometimes you can ask, have you had an experience with this? Have you had an experience with crime? Have you had an experience, do you know somebody who is an immigrant? You're going to try to listen for a personal story, and then you might deliberately ask about this, or it might be that you're having a conversation and you hear a hint of a story, and then you're going to ask follow-up questions to hear more about the story. Tell me more about that. Okay. Even if you don't know what to say, tell me more. First layer. So again, this is the code of curiosity. The whole idea of this is we're going to ask questions that kind of get down to emotional underpinnings of their story, and then a values-based opinion of the story. So the first level, you're asking kind of reportedly questions. When did that happen? Where? Who was involved? What happened? How did it happen? You'll notice that these are questions that don't have yes or no answers. Again, we want them to give more details. And then we're going to go a level deeper and we're going to say, how did that make you feel? We're not going to assume that they felt a certain way. We could say, we could assume, hey, you must have been really angry, but maybe they don't. Maybe that didn't make them feel angry. Maybe that made them feel sad or they made them feel confused. We're not going to assume, but we're going to ask them, how did this story make you feel? And then we want them to be explicit and we want the conversation to go towards that emotional side. Then we're going to ask, why do you think you felt that way? The reason we're asking that is that that gets a layer deeper into their underlying values and beliefs that then underpin how they feel. And as we'll talk about, this is kind of the gold mine that you're digging down to. This is where if we have a conversation that causes people to reflect on their values, then sometimes they will begin to understand that, hey, maybe how I feel about this one issue on like a political, or my political stances or how I respond to this situation, maybe that's in conflict with my actual core values. And then sometimes people will change their mind to resolve that. So we'll talk more about that. Okay, so we're asking questions. The next step is we need to listen. Now, we're listening and we're not interrupting. We are not interrupting. We're going to let people talk as long as they want to talk. We're going to encourage them to talk. And very importantly, we are not listening just to wait for our turn to speak. So, This is not a little chat situation here, or just raise your hand. If you've had a conversation, oftentimes this might be an argument with somebody where the other person is still speaking, but we've already decided what we're going to say in response. And at that point, we're not really listening to anything else they're saying. We are just waiting for them to take a fraction of a second to take a breath so we can say what we're planning to say. We're not going to do that. We're going to listen to understand. We're going to pay attention. And again, we need to show that we're paying attention. We need, people know if we're not actually interested in what they have to say with our fidgeting or lack of eye contact. So we're going to listen to understand. Then this is where things get a little bit more challenging. We're going to reflect back what they've said. We're essentially going to summarize what they've said. We're going to say things like, let me make sure I understand you, or what I hear you saying is whatever. You're going to summarize what they've told you. And this is where in the conversation you prove that you've actually been listening to them. Now, it's critical that we don't skip this step. Most of the time we're having a conversation, it's back and forth, and we don't do this. But it's very important we do this. And I'll give you an example from my training in the ER. This is techniques that we were taught on how, in the ER, you can imagine we have a lot of conversations, and we're meeting tons of people, and it's under stressful circumstances. And we're told to do this. We need to, we're told when somebody tells you all their symptoms, I want to just say, okay, here are the labs we're going to order, and here are the next steps. But we're instructed to say, reflect back to them their stories or what they've told us, especially how they're feeling, such as, oh, that sounds like it's been really hard on you, or I can see what a stress this has been to your family, or wow, this like that you sounds like you've been really miserable. And when I first was taught this, I thought, there's no way this is going to work. They're going to see through this. They're going to say, why are you parroting this back? Of course, that's what that's what I just said. Are you like patronizing me? But the truth is, when you actually do it, people will then say, oh, you're right. It really has been hard. Or like, yeah, but it really has been affecting my family. And this is another circumstance where people want to feel validated and understood. So we can't skip this. So not only is this where we're showing that we have proven to them that we're listening, we need to name values and feelings as well, especially. We're not just saying, what I hear you saying is here's the facts you said. We're going to say things like, it sounds like you're really frustrated by this, or you're really angry about this, or I can see you're really proud of whatever, or you really care about this. We're going to acknowledge any implicit content. They might not say, I'm really angry about this, but we're going to acknowledge this is really upsetting you. And here's a really important part. If we didn't get it right, they will correct us. And not only is that okay, that's really good because we're going to clarify what they're saying. And sometimes people will clarify things for themselves. Sometimes people will say something that maybe be a little, even inflammatory, and we will repeat back our understanding and kind of hearing back from another person what they've said, and that we are kind of seeing, oh, they might say, well, that's not quite right. And that's okay. And that actually, again, is part of the step of showing that we are paying attention to them. And what we'll do is if they say, no, 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 like this is, let me clarify that, then we're going to reflect again until we get it right. And then they'll say, like, yeah, that's correct. So the next step is validating. Now, to clarify, validating does not mean we agree with them. Again, it does not mean we agree with them. And this is where things it can be a little bit emotionally challenging for us, okay? We need to demonstrate that we are accepting not their conclusions, but we accept their experience, especially that we're acknowledging the legitimacy of their feelings and emotions. So we would say things like, I can see why that would be upsetting. Or, if that had happened to me, I can see how maybe I might feel the same way. Okay. We likely won't agree with much of what they've said, but we need to look for places that we have agreement whenever possible. If you can, describe a time that you felt the same. Okay, so, or again, this can be difficult for us. For instance, if we're talking about immigration and they're talking about, a story that they heard about or like an experience they had where, it was, maybe it was a crime story. We don't want to be able to say like we're not saying I agree that immigrants are, more likely to commit crime. We can say, we are accepting, we're validating that they had an experience by saying, I can see that you were really upset about this, or I can see that this really worried you, does not mean that we're saying that's appropriate and we agree that they should be worried, but we're validating their emotion. Okay, so a critical distinction there. Again, this is part of the building trust and building a relationship such that they don't feel that they are going to be uh, that they feel safe having these conversations with us and beginning to and continuing to be open. So we're also going to look for values that we have in common. And as far apart as we are in the political spectrum, there are some values that we all have in common as humans. And so I have these like written down sometimes because I have to remind myself of this. Some of those values are love of family, hope for our children's futures, pride in our community, or valuing hard work, hoping that we're compensated for our hard work, personal responsibility, or a sense that things should be fair, or a calling to help people in need. They may say, they may reflect that in their church volunteer work. We may do that in our, social justice work, but we all have a calling to feel we need to help people in need. Sometimes this can be, what I would call looking for the best case interpretation of what they've said. They can say inflammatory things and crazy things about gun laws, but you could say, you really want your family to be safe. I want my family to be safe too. Or if they're talking about how immigrants are taking their jobs, the best case interpretation of that might be, I also worry about how easy it might be to lose my job in this economy and how hard it might be to find work. Or if they're talking about, crazy conspiracies about the deep state and the government, you could say, it sounds like you're really worried that there are people who are really powerful and rich and they can rig the system in their favor. That really bothers me too. I had during a deep canvassing conversation, I had somebody who just went all over the place with what he was talking about. And then when he talked about that, I said, this was a deep canvassing to pass anti-gerrymandering laws. And when I talked and connected with him about that, he was like, "Yeah, you know what? Patch me through, and I'll tell my senator to vote for this thing." And so you can, we're going to look for places that we do have in common. Okay, we're taking a little momentary pause in that conversation cycle. This is what's called the relationship bank. This came out of medical training. So, if you think about a relationship as being like a bank, things that we are giving to the conversation, giving to the other conversation partner is like putting money into that bank. Things that we are asking of the other person, like listen to me, listen to my story, listen to my opinion, is withdrawing something from the bank. So this is the point where you need to make an assessment. Have I put enough into the relationship bank that I can then withdraw from it? Have I done enough to build that trust? Have I listened to them enough? Have I shown enough curiosity and asked enough questions and shown that I have been listening and validated their emotions to that they feel open to then accepting if I ask something of the relationship. So this is where if you then say the next step is going to be sharing, if you say, "Do you mind if I share something?" and they're not really ready to listen to us, we might need to put more into the relationship bank. Might need to ask more questions and validate and show and build that trust. Sometimes, if this is, for instance, like a family member that we become estranged from, that it might be multiple conversations where we're putting into the relationship bank before we can then expect to withdraw something. So this is a little bit of a checkpoint and a good idea to remember. We are going to be in order to ask something of a relationship, we need to put in money first. We need to put something in first. And again, a lot of the relationship is, we'll, as we get to the share part here, you'll notice that 80% of this conversation is listening and asking questions. 20% is telling our own stories. And that's, it's not a hard and fast rule, but we want to be asking more than speaking or telling us about ourselves. So at this point, this is where we can share information. We are going to only share information after getting consent. We're not just going to blurt out, this is my opinion, because then they will dig their heels in. We're going to say, do you mind if I share a story with you? Due to part of the brain with human reciprocity, because you have asked, they're much more likely to say yes, it's okay. And because you ask permission, you listen to them, they have bought in, they have given consent, they're more likely to be compelled to actually listen to you because now they have bought into it. They're more likely to pay attention to your story because you gave them the autonomy by asking permission. Now, we're finally going to share. This is not where we then hit them with the charts and the statistics and the facts. Or again, we're not going to argue with facts and reasons. We're going to share a personal story or an anecdote, especially if it's a story that elicits emotion. So the best thing would be a story that we were involved with, our personal experience. The next step down might be not quite as effective, but the personal experience of somebody we know. Maybe we didn't have a confrontation with ICE, but we know somebody who did have a confrontation with ICE, or they are scared about being picked up by ICE. Maybe we didn't, we weren't struggling to make ends meet, but our family member was struggling to make ends meet and, lost medical insurance. But we're going to be talking about an emotional story. We're going to tell it in as vivid detail as we can, and we're going to explicitly talk about the emotions we felt. Now, why stories? Human brains are wired to listen to stories. Stories are impactful, especially emotional stories. This is why that we have been telling similar stories all throughout history. The Bible's teachings are parables. They're stories that we learn from. This is why mythology is still with us thousands of years later. Now we got, the Odyssey. These are, the mythology is full of, of anger and betrayal and love and same thing with Shakespeare. The reason that the Shakespearean stories still resonate with us is because the emotional part of that story is very convincing for us. We have in our brain something called mirror neurons. If we reach for a cup and grab it, certain brain cells fire. If we watch somebody else grab a cup, those same brain cells fire as if we were reaching for the cup. And this actually also works on an emotional standpoint. This is why when we see other people experiencing emotions or hear people experiencing emotions, we have certain mirror neurons that activate, and we start to feel those same emotions ourselves. This is why other people's emotions are directly experienced and understood and cause emotions to spread contagiously. So if we tell an emotional story, it's much more likely that they can feel similar emotions as well. And unlike facts, they can't argue that we didn't actually feel the way we did. They can say, your facts are wrong, I got my other facts. But I've pretty much never heard somebody say, that I don't believe that emotionally impacted you. You didn't really feel that way. Especially since we have already validated the emotions and experiences that they have had. So again, there's reciprocity in accepting those emotions. Now, people frequently have conflicting beliefs or their actions conflict with their deeply held personal values. So, looking back on that first video on the doorstep talking about same-sex marriage, you'll notice that that person, although he said he didn't vote, he probably voted against the same-sex marriage initiative, and he had deep held beliefs that love is important. Love is love. You can't choose who you love. It's fundamental. It's of utmost importance. but he had this other, this other thought that, oh, I'm not comfortable with this. So that is what's called cognitive dissonance. And a lot of people live with cognitive dissonance, but thinking about the cognitive dissonance that you hold can be very uncomfortable. So most people go about their lives not thinking about that. But if your conversation causes people to reflect on that they have some cognitive dissonance, and they kind of come to understand that they hold that cognitive dissonance, they'll often change their own minds to resolve that cognitive dissonance. So you'll notice that that canvasser didn't say, hey, you say you care about your family member, but you're voting in a way that makes life harder for them. What's wrong with you? Instead, he asked continued open-ended questions until he kind of realized that what he was voting for was against what he actually believed, and he changed his own mind. Now, that's a very subtle trick. You can't just point it out to them, because pointing it out to them that they have cognitive dissonance, it feels like you're calling them out for being hypocritical, and that will make them defensive. So this is the part where you'll notice the canvasser said things like, that made you, I can see this is really emotional for you. Why do you feel like that? Or you can say, it sounds like you have a lot of complex thoughts on this topic, or what's coming to mind for you right now. Sometimes what's the right thing to do is just hold that silence. Sometimes holding the silence is enough. The other person will oftentimes want to fill in that blank space in that held silence, and they will keep talking and they'll work through the conflict themselves. Now, again, one of those take-home points, the goal is just to plant a seed of an idea. Now, most of the time, there won't be an epiphany on the doorstep like that first conversation. The truth is, that was probably the end of a journey he has been on for a long time. He has probably had conversations with somebody who planted seeds of an idea at some time in the past, or you're taking in information gradually over time. So don't expect one conversation to then be, switch somebody 180 degrees. This conversation that you saw the video of was likely the end journey after a long time of reflection. So when we're having a first conversation, we're just going to be planting a seed of an idea. So that wrestling with their cognitive dissonance continues after the conversation ends. If that's, and what often happens is that seed of an idea that you planted will be supplemented by similar seeds of ideas they'll receive from somebody else. And then the second time they hear that, because you've already brought up that idea, their ears perk up. It's kind of like if you don't listen, you don't pay attention to the cars on the street until you say, "Oh, I need to buy a car," and then you start noticing, the brand or color of the car that you're thinking about. So when you plant a seed of idea and they start wrestling with it, and then maybe they hear similar ideas as time goes on, then it might start becoming more like common knowledge, or what they see like common knowledge. Now, if the seed of the idea you plant is nothing more than, I guess there's one liberal who isn't crazy and I kind of like, that's progress. Again, I'll repeat that. If the seed you plant is nothing more than, I kind of like this person, or I don't hate them, or they don't seem crazy, that's progress. Relationships lower political extremism, and it makes it harder to dehumanize the other side. When we get really polarized times like right now, extremists seek to dehumanize people. They call their people rats and vermin. They say they're not real Americans. But emotional conversations like what we're going to have with people seek to humanize people. This is really critical during, periods of political polarization, because if it gets to a point where some people are calling for violence, people will be less on board with violence if they see the other side and they see there's one person who might be affected by that, or I can see the human character in that person on the other side of the political spectrum, because we have had an emotional conversations and they have an emotional connection with us. If we have a successful conversation where they walk away feeling good, it makes the next conversation easier and more productive. That might be a conversation we have if we're a part of their life, they're a coworker, or they're in our family. Or it might be if we're on the doorstep they might be more open to talking to somebody else later on because they've had a good conversation with us and we're closer to being part of what they would consider their tribe. Now, that is a lot to take in, and it is important to acknowledge this is hard work. This will be messy, and that's okay. We have that conversation cycle. That is a guide for us. But conversations don't ever follow a strict script. They go one place and then another. We need to be able to roll with the punches. So if in doubt, wherever the conversation goes, sometimes we don't know what to say next. We don't need to be paralyzed with, I don't know the right thing to say. If ever in doubt, reflect again what our understanding of what they said. It only builds the relationship and the trust that we've been listening, or ask another curious question. Now, in these conversations, it's likely that this will be emotionally difficult for us. They might say inflammatory things, either unintentionally, or they might say things that are needling and try to make us upset. Nobody knows how to push your buttons better than a family member. In those circumstances, I didn't come up with this. I can't remember who to attribute it to, but the really words of wisdom are, let your first words in response be your breath. Take a moment. Literally take a deep breath, slowly let it out. If you do that, if they notice that, it is essentially they are seeing that you are restraining yourself and you're not jumping down their throat and being confrontational. Sometimes it just gives them time for the words that they just said, if it's inflammatory, to kind of linger to the point that sometimes they feel a little bit uncomfortable about what they've said. Sometimes they might, apologize and say, I went too far. Now, some of this, again, it's hard work. It can, in the same way that, we can't, sometimes it can be hard to understand how people can believe what they do. Some things to remind ourselves. It's good to remind ourselves that under different life circumstances, we might believe like they do. Okay. If we lived in a rural town where everybody else was strongly conservative and believed, taught us religious things that were kind of outside the mainstream and taught us to hate people, and there were tons of guns in the house, and we connected with our father by going hunting, under different life circumstances, if we grew up in the same family as they did in the same town, we might feel the same way as they do, and it's good to remember that. And then also, we need to remind ourselves, we believe our current beliefs, but we didn't always believe everything we believe. There's actually another thing that studies have shown. It's easy for our brains to forget that there were a time that we felt differently about something. There's a book called Do You Still Talk to Grandma that gives a good anecdote of somebody who was really upset with their family because they were a vegan and they didn't want their family serving turkey at Thanksgiving. And they went on and on about, how it's environmentally irresponsible and it's cruel, and there's lots of other things they could eat, and why won't they listen? They're just being intransigent, they don't care. And then the author asked, well, how long have you been vegan? And they responded, 3 months. So they're very vehement about what they believed, and they could not understand why other people didn't believe the same thing. But there was a point not that long ago where they also didn't believe that. So we need to give people the grace and understanding to say, they might be in this position right now. They can change, and we need to be humble and realize that, that we need to give them time, and we need to give them an open space to potentially change their minds, and we might be the one to bring them along that understanding. So finally, remember, this is our superpower. Okay, you're gonna go out there, you're gonna read about the social media algorithms suppressing things we believe in, and they're taken over by billionaires who are buying news organizations across the country, and Fox News is piped into everybody's TVs, and it seems sometimes overwhelming. How can we have an effect? Well, this is essentially a way around that captured system. They can't down throttle and shadow ban a conversation that we have with somebody face to face in person or by phone. So we have a direct route, and the thing is, our brains have evolved also to value these relationships. So as much as these algorithms have been captured and built to pull us apart, our brains will still overvalue, or they will assign appropriate value to the relationships we have with people. Pope Leo recently said, no algorithm can replace a hug. So very important. This is our power. And when this becomes difficult, we need to remind ourselves, if it's not us, who else is going to do this? We need to be the ones to have these conversations. I wish the world was fair. I wish we could say, why don't they, they're the ones who are estranged from us. Why don't they come to us? It's not fair. It's always going to be unfair. We're the ones who are trying to make a fairer world. And so we need to take it upon ourselves to just take the hard step and do the things that we need to do. So, quick summary. That is a lot. Or in a conversation, we're going to open with asking questions. They are not closed-ended. We're not asking yes or no questions. We're going to ask non-judgmental, curious, open-ended questions. We're going to use that cone of curiosity. We're going to try to ask for a story for their experiences, or we're going to follow up on a hint of a story they give. We're going to ask more and more details, and then we're going to ask, how did it make you feel? And then we're going to talk about them on an emotional aspect. And then we're going to ask, why do you think you felt that way? We're going to get down to a discussion so they feel comfortable talking about their deep held personal beliefs and values. We're going to listen. We're going to try to understand their perspective. We're going to not just listen for our chance to speak. And then we're going to reflect by summarizing what they've said. If we don't get it right, they will correct us, and that is good. That tricky part, we're going to validate the legitimacy of they're going to, we're going to validate, we're going to acknowledge, especially their emotional experience. It does not mean we believe what they believe. It doesn't mean that we're going to try to come to some mushy middle ground that leaves, people out of what we're trying to change politically. We're just going to say, I can see that really affected you. We're going to validate that they had an emotional reaction. This is where we can check to make sure, have we put enough into the relationship bank? If we haven't, we can go back. A lot of this conversation, it's a nice cycle here, but the truth of the conversation is we're going to ask questions. We're going to listen. We're going to ask more questions. We're going to listen. We're going to reflect. Then we're going to hear another story. We're going to ask about those other story. We're going to validate that. We're going to say, can I share something? They might not be ready. We'll have to ask more questions. So we're going to roll with the punches. But when we share a story, we're going to say, do you mind if I share an experience I had? We're going to tell an emotional story. We're going to explicitly talk about the emotional impact of that. They're going to be more likely to be receptive to that because it's hard to argue we didn't feel that way. And they're going to be more likely to have an understanding about an emotion, that this had an emotional impact. And we're just going to plant a seed of an idea that might be, oh, somebody had a different experience on this topic, or it might just be, I had this conversation with a Democrat, and you know what? It wasn't a crazy Antifa person who I think is going to throw a brick through my door. And I wouldn't mind having a conversation again. And it's going to open the door to future conversations and make it more likely to lower their defensiveness and give them potentially an off ramp, a safe tribe that they could potentially go to, or at the very least, humanize the other side of the political spectrum so it's more difficult to want to call for violence. Okay, finally, that's a ton of information. So here's the takeaways. Facts and reason don't work. They make people less likely to change. It's the backfire effect. They'll dig their heels in. Look to build relationships instead of throwing facts at them. Remember, you can't make somebody change their mind, but through open conversations where they feel comfortable talking about these things, we can lead them to a point where they can see that they held cognitive dissonance or feel comfortable potentially changing their own mind. And when they change their own minds, studies have actually shown it is much longer lasting or maybe even be permanent compared to just handing somebody a pamphlet on a doorstep. If in doubt, ask another question or just reflect your understanding of what they're saying. Those are easy things to go back to. And the goal in the conversation is only to plant a seed of a seed of an idea that could potentially grow over time. And that seed might be nothing more than saying, again, that liberal person isn't a crazy person. Okay, thank you so much. Anybody have questions?
Oh, we
Or
have a few. So actually, I'm just catching. In the moment as you were finishing up, and I was sorting out the questions, I've got looks like three more great questions. So I'm going to do my best to kind of sort these a little bit and try to do the low-hanging fruit a little bit first, which not a judgment on your questions, but some of them are 101 questions, some of them are 201 questions, some of them are grad level questions. So we'll do what we can. If we don't get to address all your questions, I apologize. A lot of you have raised questions that we could spend another hour, a wonderful hour, talking about. So I'm just going to start with Stephen Craig because he just popped this one up right in front of me. How much time should this process take? It sounds like it takes more than one talk with them. Absolutely. This it takes as much time as you have. If you're doing deep canvassing, you get one shot at that doorstep. If it's a friend of yours and you can have coffee with them every week, this might be a 5, 10 coffee series of conversations. So to Chris's point, you're going to plant these seeds. The longer you have more conversations with them, the more you may see, actual changes in them over the course of months or years or decades. But even if you can't have 3 or 4 conversations with the same person, having one or two, having one, if at the very least, as Chris said, you lower that defensiveness they have against what they might have an idea of what a liberal Democrat, progressive, leftist, whatever, is like, that works. But yes, it's going to be a slow process in most cases. It's going to be a series of repetition and more conversations. Let me go back to the some of the earlier ones too, so I'm not just pulling
And
up
I
the
will
most.
add
Yeah, go ahead.
that a lot of like how often you might have to have a conversation, how many times is going to depend on where they are right now as well.
Mhm.
If they're just kind of they consider themselves, independent, but they always vote Republican, but they are not like, far right. You're probably, a single conversation might be enough, on a topic, especially if it's not like really inflammatory. If it's something that they are very far right and they're down a QAnon rabbit hole, that's going to take a lot more, conversations, especially if it's over something that is kind of emotionally, impacting or, brings up a lot of emotions as well. So we kind of also have to, gauge, that where they start is going to affect how many conversations and how difficult it might be. But again, this, on the far ends of the spectrum, we need to be patient. We need to be patient.
Yeah, and keep in mind, like those deep canvassing conversations, they usually have a specific electoral question issue they want to raise. They can get right to it. A lot of your conversations might be with someone where you're just trying to figure out where they're coming from on a number of issues. They might be with a relative or a friend that you've had a kind of a falling out with, and you're just trying to repair things across the board, as opposed to just, hey, I want to talk to you about this particular topic. Let me throw out a few more
And
here.
sorry to jump in again, Locke. A
Okay.
really important, just because I don't know if anybody asked it, but a very common question I actually wanted to put a slide in is people ask, where do I start? Where do I start? So if we come to, when you're deep canvassing, again, you might have you might have a script, or like, it's talking about one topic. If we come to just somebody on a bar, or we come to our family member and say, I want to talk about this, that's again asking something that for the relationship bank that we haven't put in. A lot of times these conversations might be a matter of, asking them how they're feeling. People want to talk about what they're thinking about. If we say, open a question of how are you feeling about the economy these days, or how do you feel about the direction of the country, they might go off about Iran. They might go about Medicare, or medical costs. They might talk about, data centers. So a lot of times we're going to ask such an open-ended question that we're essentially asking, what's on your mind right now? And that will be the in for our conversation. If they are talking and you're having a conversation and they bring up a certain topic, obviously that's on their mind. And feel free to again ask further questions and then ask for, the story. So if some of the easiest way to go about this is like, how are you feeling about the country right now? How are you feeling about the world? What's on your mind?
Yeah. I'm going to throw off a couple here and try to give some quick answers because we really do have a lot of great questions. Thomas asked, if we are asking someone to change, shouldn't we be willing to be changed by what they say? Absolutely. Absolutely. You, there is a lot of, there is an idealistic way in which we enter these conversations with genuine curiosity and genuine openness. I'll admit, most of us probably aren't there today. Having these conversations can help us get there. And one of the things that helps us get to is being open-minded about this. Um, they may not change your views about major, completely 180 on major issues, but they might show you nuances that you hadn't thought of or angles that you hadn't thought of. So yes, you should be willing to be changed by what they say. That it's a two-way street.
And again, this is
Oh
like
yeah.
Terrence Marius has essentially made smart politics specifically with the intention of giving these tools largely for progressive liberals. But that doesn't mean like this is not with an idea of, hey, we need to come to like a mushy middle ground where, still people our problems are not being solved and people are still being left behind or hurt. We need to be open to potential change. But the truth is, I feel pretty strongly about this. A lot of people have opinions pretty much because they were given to them by family or Fox News talking points, and maybe they don't hold those values very closely, but they may. So again, this isn't to say the goal is to come to a middle ground. We are doing this because we believe in these things and we think it's important for the country and the world and for people's health and safety, and that's why we feel passionate about them. So we do need to be open to potentially changing our minds, but we're doing this hard work because we think it's important.
Yes. Yes, exactly. I forgot what I was going to say, but I'll just move on to the
All
next
right.
question then and see if it comes back to me. Catherine asked, what would you say to those who think political views are a private matter? That's if it's okay with them, that's the topic of your conversation. Don't try to push them into a political. They say, I would love to hear more about that. Can you tell me more about why you feel uncomfortable or you prefer not to share your political views? And you listen to them and you reflect. And at the end, you might say, if it's okay, I'd like to share with you why I believe in that because I personally, Locke have gone through a change over the decades, in how I view politics and in relation to my life. And I would tell them like, hey, there was a time when I was not terribly into or impressed by people always talking about politics. I get it. But this is why I changed my mind and why I think it's important now. So you just use the same process. That's what I was going to say earlier too, when just now when Chris was talking about this is progressive, for progressives to talk to people on the right. One of the things we're finding, I think all of us right now, especially this moment, August 2026, is we need to have conversations with people to the left of us as well. There's a lot of talk going on right now about the left, progressive, Democrat, liberal, however you want to break it down. So the process is always the same. It's always the same, whether you're talking to a person on the left or the right, whoever it is, the process is ask, listen, reflect, validate, share.
Yeah, actually, the last webinar we had, the one who was the person organizing it specifically asked us to kind of gear the conversation towards how do you have productive conversations, not adversarial conversations within the left. So it was like moderates versus
Mhm.
like DSA people, or
Yeah.
talking about contentious issues within our own group, such as how to deal with the issue and between Israel and Palestine. And so a lot of this is also like calling what's called calling in, where we're not, instead of calling out, we're not shaming people for their views. We're taking people aside to saying like, having these personal conversations, like, tell me more about how you feel, and then like coming to an agreement as well. So it works on both sides.
hmm Yeah. Back to quickly wrap up Catherine's question. So You said, what do you say to people who think political views are a private matter? That's an interesting one, and then you can have a conversation about that. What I run into the most in my small town among my old classmates in rural Iowa is they just don't want to talk about politics. It's not so much that it's a private matter, just like part of it is cultural. You're not supposed to. You're not supposed to talk about politics, religion, or sex, you know. Part of it is that they're burned out. They're sick of it. They're sick of hearing about it. They're sick of the division and the conflict. Um, and so again, you can talk to them about that and say, you know, I understand where you're coming from. It's not pleasant. And if you're okay with it, I'd like to tell you why I'm asking you about politics. And if they say no, I'd rather not, then you got to respect that. Consent's important in a conversation as anywhere else.
And my
Um,
feeling also is that, sometimes people may reflexively say, like, I don't want to talk about politics, or I don't think it's polite to talk politics because they don't feel comfortable doing it. And they might not feel that comfort that if I have a conversation about my political view, somebody's not going to yell at me.
yeah,
And then also my other thought on that is, yes, ideally we'd love to live in a world where we can just have our own political thoughts. But the truth is, politics is how we affect the world and affect change. And if we aren't willing to potentially have if we're so wedded to the norms and want to make sure people aren't feeling uncomfortable or possibility of feeling uncomfortable, then we can't affect change in the world. And if we don't have these conversations, people are getting hurt and the planet is warming, and we need to have this hard work. So,
yeah. And again, completely forgot what I was gonna say.
sorry, I keep
The
interrupting you a lot.
the yeah, oh, I know what it was. A lot of the things we're going to find is that if you talk to someone and this goes for friends, relatives, people you've known for decades, they think we're going to call them idiots. They think we're going to call them racists. They think we're going to call them names, or they think that we're going to call them stupid for not knowing all the ins and outs of the political landscape that we might be familiar with. So that's part of the work. Is the question is to lower those defenses. So look, I'm not going to call you names. I'm not going to get mad at you. I want to hear what you have to say. I'm not here to hit you with facts about what you don't know about politics. So that's one of the reasons you lower that defensiveness that Chris is talking about. Um, Moving along, Constance, this is a quick one. Where might apology be offered, or would you recommend not to apologize? I think aside from apology, just being vulnerable and saying, "Hey, I've made mistakes before, and I've had attitudes and feelings about folks on the right or folks that voted for Trump that were not generous and were not kind or compassionate. I've fallen prey to my own emotions on this, and I apologize if I've ever projected that on you or shown that to you or been less than open and compassionate to you. I'm learning too. I'm on my own journey is what he was, I'm figuring this out for myself too. So I'm not sure, Constant, what you meant by apology. You could stick it in the comments if you want to clarify. But just to apologize and say, hey, I'm sorry if I said things in the past that made you feel less or made you feel like I wasn't listening to you or that I didn't take you seriously or that I thought if I said things that directly or indirectly made you feel like I thought you were a bad person. So,
I think apology is like one of the most important things you can do to again build trust, especially if you have a relationship that's estranged. And again, it doesn't mean that you agree with what everything they've said, but if you've had arguments before and it's the conversations ended badly, you can, as Locke was saying, hey, I'm sorry about how our last conversation ended. I got heated. I said some things that I wish I want to take back. I value our relationship. I'd love to be able to talk to you again sometime. And maybe they're not ready to talk to you right then, but you can just have that apology and then reach out to them again in the future. And again, it doesn't mean that you agree with everything they said. And we critically shouldn't expect an apology from them. Again, the burden is us who are trying to make the world better. We have to take these harder steps. We can't say, well, I'm not apologizing until you apologize to me, because then nothing happens. So I think apologies, especially if it's like you ended in an argument, is a great way to open things up again, especially if you haven't communicated with somebody for some time.
yes, thank you, Constance, for clarification. Apologies if I made them feel uncomfortable. Exactly what we were talking about. I also this is a good chance to talk about emotions. We talked a lot about the tools here. I see a lot of comments tonight are very, very familiar and human and natural is that it takes some time to get even to the headspace where you want or believe in doing this. You might think, I can't talk to these folks. I can't do this. I can't talk to racists. I don't want anything to do with racists. I don't want them to feel comfortable. I don't want them to feel, safe or secure. I understand that. I understand that. We've all been somewhere in that spectrum. A lot of this work, well, I want to rephrase that. A lot of it involves getting ourselves into a place where we feel a genuine curiosity and compassion for them. But doing the work, chicken and the egg, doing the work can get us to that place of compassion and genuine curiosity. I have found that when I do this work and I talk to people, and that includes friends and relatives, and whether it's about politics or anything else, I find that as I try to listen more and reflect and validate and go through all these steps, that my compassion and curiosity towards them grows, and it becomes more and more genuine. There's a little bit of fake it till you make it. I don't want to say it in a diminishing way, but we've been trained for a long time in a lot of conversational and cultural attitudes that are not helpful in this moment. They're combative, they're defensive. That's natural. We're all humans. So what we're trying to do, what Karen is trying to do with this work, and I've been working with her for 6 years, and she's been doing this for 10 years, is to get us over the hump of some of these bad habits we've established in the past. And one bad habit, and this is going to answer a question here. Someone, I think it was Joe, said, I sometimes think debate training would be good tools for today. Yes, and as Karen taught me to say, Karen was a debater. Karen Tamaris, Dr. Tamaris, who founded all this, she grew up in high school and college as a debater. She met her husband through debate team. And she developed Smart Politics in 2016 and 2017 because she would approach her uncle, who was a Trump supporter, to try to find out why. And she approached him as a debater. And that did not work. That threw up defenses. Debate serves its purposes in the law, in the courtroom, for lawyers, for politicians. Debate is powerful. But for us one-on-one with other human beings, debate can get a little bit in our way if we're trying to win the argument. Because debate is usually about winning. You present your points and then you try to win. We're not trying to win an argument here. We're not even trying to argue. We're trying to listen and connect. So.
Yeah, and very importantly, there's another book called Don't Talk About Politics that really addresses that, and it talks about how classically we've had in the States, especially, an idea of the marketplace of ideas, because of course we're a capitalist society. So the marketplace of ideas, people have ideas, and the best one will come, will rise to the top. But the truth is, and as Locke was saying, we have this idea about the way to come have these arguments is to debate and adversarial, and that's why every news station, there's so many talking heads where station or shows where it'll be one person on one side, one person on the other side, yell, 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 and then it ends. And even in high school or college debate, there will be a judge who then makes a decision. But you'll notice nobody is saying, hey, winning means the other person is convinced. Even when you're in the high school debate, somebody has chosen the winner, but it doesn't mean that they've convinced the other side. So the whole idea of the marketplace ideas, that adversarial conversations, again, most of the time it's talking about facts, my facts versus your facts. Somebody is declared a winner, but in reality, no one's minds are changed, and so we can't do the things that don't work.
Yeah, I think Karen always says we're not. I know she did not say this. It was I want to say it's maybe Adam Grant. I apologize if I got attributed that attribution wrong. We don't want to be politicians. We don't want to be preachers, and we don't want to be prosecutors. Those are all noble callings, and not to run them down. But in these conversations, I heard someone earlier on a different webinar. I've always often thought of them as anthropology. I think that I've struggled with that a little bit because I don't want that to feel like we're examining them like they're some sort of strange animal. They're human beings just like us. But we are approaching with an open mind to understand. So there is Ari. I see you there. You had a great question. You had a great point about when we were talking about Daryl Davis. You mentioned in Mississippi, the KKK killing Emmett Till. Never try to. even today, I would never try to reason with a Klansman, nor would I encourage any other black person to do so. And yeah, Karen and I have always joked that we should have a little cigarette warning at the bottom of everything we do, which says, this is designed, this is not excluding anyone who wants to do this work, but the work is designed for peers with privilege. So that, if you are a white person with privilege and you can go into a conversation with someone who is being openly racist and have less fear of them physically or, really attacking you, then and you can do that and you have the emotional strength to do that. That's the work you should be doing. It should not be upon people from historically marginalized communities to have to stand up and have these conversations with their oppressors, unless they, like Daryl Davis, they really feel like they should. And one thing I always want to point out when Chris talks about Daryl Davis, he was in these bands, these bar bands in the 50s and 60s. He learned how to fight, and he said that's why he had no problem at first talking to these Klans members, because he was not physically afraid of them. I would be terrified of anybody that I felt like was going to get in my face. I'm kind of a wuss. But yes, there's a certain amount of privilege or special cases where an individual feels they have a strength or a privilege that allows them to do that. We don't advocate anyone putting themselves in a position that emotionally, physically, or any other way would be dangerous or harmful to them. That's just
Yeah, the only point of bringing that Daryl Davis up is not to say, black people should talk to KKK members, is to show you would think that a KKK member is somebody who would never ever change their mind, but you can actually change their mind. And I wouldn't have believed it if Daryl Davis had not done it. So it just is incumbent upon us who are able to safely have these conversations. I am a white male, white cisgender male from middle class background. I have more responsibility to try to change people's minds than people who have, could be physically harmed. So those of us who have the ability and the privilege to safely do these things have more responsibility. But those examples are really just to show the remarkable change that can occur in people if we are willing to put in the work.
Yeah, and there's always a paradox with sharing, like, for instance, the Daryl Davis story, which is so inspirational. It's really inspirational for exactly what Chris said. It's all, wow, this is so extreme. Someone could actually do this. On the other hand, it can also discourage us, like, well, I couldn't talk to a KK member, or that seems like an extreme situation. You're not going to be talking to a KK member. You're probably going to be talking to your slightly racist uncle who says inappropriate things after a few beers at holidays. It's going to vary. Who you talk to is going to vary. I always say anybody can be talked to. Stephen Miller could be talked to. Donald Trump could be talked to. I always say that's not who you're probably going to be talking to. You're probably going to be talking to people you know. I probably couldn't talk to Stephen Miller or Donald Trump, but there's somebody out there close to them that could. So you don't want to set yourself up for failure by saying, well, I can't talk to a Nazi or I can't talk to a racist. You're not. You're gonna talk to a human being you meet or know in your family or at work, or maybe you meet on the internet. One of the biggest things I think that trips us up in this work sometimes, that psychs us out, we all live on social media, we all follow the news. We see Trump and Stephen Miller and Hegseth and those guys, and we think that's who we're going to be talking to. Or we see influencers or pundits or Sean Hannity, and we think, well, that's who I'm going to be talking to. No, probably not. Unless you have a different circle of friends and exposure than I do, you're not talking to those folks. You're talking to average voters, the vast majority of which who you'll find do not have big, strong, deeply held feelings about why they voted. Some of them do, some of them absolutely do. A lot of them are what we would call like less engaged. They're just sort of like, well, I voted for Trump because, prices were going up and I, this and that and the other thing. So yeah. Let's see. I think we're winding down. John, you had a great question at the end there. I just want to throw it out there. I think it's a quick, easy one. If a fundamental attraction to MAGA is a grievance, if a fundamental attraction to MAGA is grievance, that they like it because it indulges their grievance, can grievance be a topic of conversation as you've described? Yes, absolutely, absolutely. If that's what they want to talk about and they're willing to talk about it, it gets a little meta. You're not really talking about the issues. You're talking about how we feel about the issues. But I think that one of the things you want to get at is, and in all this work, is you want to to whatever degree you can, you want to tease out the emotions behind their stances or their statements. Okay, what's driving you? We know that a lot of it is fear. A lot of it is fear. A lot of it is fear of harm. Ari Hochschild, who I really, really love, sociologist, well, she's written tons of books. The first one that caught most people's eye was Strangers in Their Own Land, which was published in 2016, right before the election, where she went down to Louisiana and talked to folks who voted Republican, but whose lives are being destroyed by environmental destruction of fossil fuel work in Louisiana. And what she found was she wanted to get at their deep story. She called it their deep story. And the deep story is what's driving you? What are you telling yourself that's emotionally driving you? And what she found with them was there was a feeling of grievance that somebody cut ahead of them in line. They got in line for the American dream and they feel like somebody, usually marginalized communities, others that they can blame, got in front of them. So you're looking for someone's deep story, and that deep story may likely be, in some cases, grievance. It may be that, oh, I'm just mad because I feel like nobody's listening to me, nobody's worrying about me, nobody cares about my family. I'm also reading Outraged by Kurt Gray, and he gets a lot into the fact that how we perceive harm. What drives our polarization is we perceive harm. Someone's trying to harm us, they're trying to harm our family. And the perfect example of that is like the immigration debate, where you say, I see this as harming, innocent immigrants, and their families who are here trying to improve their lives. They see it as the harm is to the cases where there's violence committed by immigrants, or the harm to my family, the harm to my job, the harm to our economy, all of which we could debate the particulars about whether that's accurate or not, but the feeling of harm is there. And I see, I think it might have been Chris. Yes, Chris threw up the links. So I'm glad you did that, Chris. I'm glad you did that. I'm also going to throw in the slides right now, but you'll also be able to get, no, I can't throw the slides. Maybe I can. We'll see. So I want to walk through those links for you guys really quickly before we have to go. Smart Politics. So Smart Politics was founded in 2017 by Dr. Karen Tamaris. As I said, she founded it to figure out why, as a progressive from Berkeley, from the Bay Area, why her uncle believed these things, why her uncle voted for Trump. And this became the things you've seen tonight that Dr. Chris was teaching. For those of you who have questions or would like to get more into this, I host on most Sunday nights, not every Sunday night, not this coming Sunday night, but 2 weeks from now. We host a Sunday night Zoom group. It's usually pretty small. It's usually about half a dozen folks. We can talk about issues that people are having, support, emotional support. You can come in with specific things like, hey, I've been estranged from my sister for 5 years, and that's really tearing me apart. How can I deal with this? You might just say, hey, I attended one of the webinars, and I wanted to learn more about reflecting, or I wanted to learn more about this, that, or the other thing. Some of the questions you guys have raised tonight would be great ones. So that's that first link there is just a Zoom form where you put your email in, you end up on my email list. You get a reminder on Sundays that we're going to meet that evening, Sundays at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Zoom. After that, it's the Smart Politics website. That's kind of just the general bells and whistles, Linktree resources page, Substack. Substack is where we're doing a lot of our work these days. It's listed under Karen Tamaris, substack.com. It's called The Smart Politics Way. Karen and I have started a podcast this summer. We have to on pause right now. Karen has a compromised immune system, and I'll be honest with you, she would be honest with you too. It just means that sometimes we can't. She has laryngitis right now, so hard to do a podcast with laryngitis. But anyway, Substack is where you'll see articles, where you'll see podcasts, where you'll get notices about webinars that Dr. Chris is going to be doing. So Substack is it's probably the most active place right now to keep tabs on what we're doing. And then the Angry Uncle Bot is something that Karen and her son created a few years ago. I know we all have mixed feelings about AI. This is one I had trepidation about it myself as a writer, but this is basically a training tool. And I can get behind that for using AI as a training tool. You plug into it, you get this angry uncle, and you can ask him, you can pick a topic and say, let's talk about immigration. And you tell the Dr. Karen on the tool, my stance is that, this is my stance on immigration. And then angry uncle takes the opposite one and he'll argue with you. And it's a great way to practice all these things we've been talking about tonight, the cycle and everything else. So it's on ChatGPT. You can get a subscription and use it as much as you want. Without a subscription, I think you can do like 10 questions every 3 hours or something like that. Karen is working on a way to try to make it free for everybody. All right, that was my long info dump.
Yeah. Hey, Locke, thank you so
Yes.
much. I just really want to take this. I don't know if you guys had a chance to read the chat, but a lot of love in the chat. Dr. Chris too. But yeah, Chris Hale, really appreciate it. Have to tell you, I went to your workshop, and it's really what turned me on to smart politics, and especially just some of the brain research. That was very interesting to me, and how people can become so wedded into their tribe, if you will, and that we're hardwired in a way, to behave in that way. So that really made a lot of sense to me. And Locke, appreciate all the work that you're doing and hosting those Sunday sessions. I know I went to a couple of them, and then just life got real busy with my activism here. But the resources are in the chat. And I think, Locke, are you going to put your slides in there? If not, we'll try and send them out.
I'll throw them in there right now, so everyone
Okay.
get ready, because you want to grab them before they close, before you leave the
Before we go.
chat. Da-da.
And again, as I've said before, this is drinking from a fire hose. This is so much information condensed down. This is kind of like a culmination of all kinds of research, so many books, that I've read. This is, it's best practices, and it takes a lot of time to even change the mindset that this is the way to go about it. And a lot of times it's actually trying it out before you're actually convinced this will work. Because again, things seem so polarized. You think there's no way that this will work until we have these conversations and see, oh, people will, do respond to it. It's hard to believe. So go through the slides. We'd encourage you to come to the office hours meeting and have these conversations. This was like a 101. We're really thinking about doing like a 201 and like additional training. That might involve like how to have conversations about specific topics. A lot of it might be, from like deep canvassing training is developing, our stories, like having, a story about, if a topic comes to immigration, what would be my immigration story that has an emotional or impact, or, climate change. The good thing about these techniques is we have so many things that we want to work on in the world, and these techniques can be used for all of them. But yeah, follow up. It's a lot. Very much we encourage other people to, or encourage everybody to come to another presentation, or very much tell friends and family. The more that we teach people, the more like our impact on the world grows, and we can have conversations, but if we teach more people to have conversations, we have an even bigger impact. So as we talked about before, have face-to-face conversations. Don't just send it, you can send links on social media, but better yet, call your friends and family and other activists you work with and say, hey, I saw this really good presentation. I learned a lot. I think it would be helpful as well.
Yeah. So Sunday night, we call it Sunday night office hours. That's what Chris was referring to. I put the slides in, but I believe they'll also be sent out by the organizers. So if you don't grab them off the chat right now, you'll have another chance to get them. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you. Thank you. Maybe we'll have you back again. This was an excellent session. And I hope for the folks that are regulars on with Northwest Suburb Organizing for Action, you're seeing how this all kind of interconnects with our sharing our stories, workshops that we do, and then Kara sessions on what I wish I could have said, the Braver Angel sessions. I mean, one of the common themes in all of this is just active listening and having those conversations with people, and and respectful listening too, right? I mean, it's just And we didn't even have a chance to have Mary Lisa's session, which was called Curious Conversations. So that'll happen after the election, and we'll kind of resume our Learning Lab session. So again, thanks everybody. I'm going to close it out, and boy, wow, you hung in there for 2 hours. So so it was very, very engaging. Appreciate you, Chris and Locke. Okay, have a good night, everybody. Going to close it down.
Night.
You'll notice I'm in a different background. I drove back from where I